Yes.
low key.
So our first COVID patient, he was a patient who came from the hospital. So we're assuming he was exposed at the hospital, which at that time, the hospital, like ICU numbers were really increasing with the holidays. And so we had, I think, within like a couple of days, we had like 4 patients test positive.
Mm.
And anyone who was potentially exposed patient wise was like put immediately into quarantine. And I think all in all, we had about like 6 patients who ended up testing positive, and they immediately went into a COVID unit, basically like blocked off area of rooms that were designated for people who were COVID positive.
Yeah.
And like the nurse who's in there, there's like a nurse and a CNA in there treating those patients. And then like I would see the COVID patients that were on caseload. So I'd have to treat all my other patients and then go into the COVID unit, do my PPE, and leave straight from there. And
Were you ever like nervous?
yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I was like, all
Like
right,
being the person.
make sure I'm doing all these steps exactly, correct. And it's, yeah, I mean, but I see how that PPE can help and can literally make a difference and prevent that, exposure. So,
Yeah,
uh,
and you said I know you said you didn't see many COVID like during the time of COVID, but did you see anyone like maybe recovering from post hospitalization?
yes, we've had a couple who have come, like, typically they aren't directly coming to us with that
Like
diagnosis.
post-COVID.
Yeah, but there's typically something else. Like we recently had a patient and we're just now seeing that more,
Yeah.
I would say. Not as much last year, but we currently have a patient who ended up having to have a pacemaker put in.
Mm-hmm.
And she had COVID about a month ago, and she still has lingering symptoms and potentially, like, potentially some of those symptoms may have exacerbated her heart condition, leading to her needing the pacemaker. So, but she's luckily recovering well, which is great.
Yeah, I have one patient who I'm seeing them in their home, and they had COVID, and took him for a loop, but thankfully survived and everything. But as of even the family members, when I talk to them, they're not the same. Their actions aren't the same. They don't, not that they don't move as right, but they're just not as motivated as they used to, and it just really took a lot out of them essentially, and maybe wouldn't have been in the same spot if not have ever gotten it beforehand.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that it has a significant effect. And it's interesting the population that I have, because a lot of my patients that I'm seeing are honestly 80 years plus.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm like, oh, this is a young patient if they're like 78.
I
um,
know.
so like I'm seeing like some of our COVID patients who had it. We had a couple that we lost. They declined because of COVID, and they were all like 95 plus years old. So it just, it's kind of different getting like someone who is in a skilled nursing facility at like requiring a significant amount of assistance with activity and mobility, and having them deal with post COVID versus someone who's getting back to like day-to-day life of, a physical, human, versus someone who needs to be able to get to, on and off the toilet and that kind of stuff. So
Walk
it's
to
just
lunch, like.
their goals, and what they do. But
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and again, obviously, most of the people who are having a hard time are with older, thankfully, and glad we're not seeing people who are like in their 40s and 50s who are like struggling with this, because that would be quite cumbersome.
absolutely.
And what about you, Anthony? What are you? And you said you're an outpatient, right?
Yeah, completely.
And are you seeing anybody who's had COVID, or are you mostly seeing a general basic caseload?
In the last couple of months, I haven't really had much experience with the direct post COVID patient. A lot of it initially, even from an outpatient standpoint, like you were saying, all the 40, 50-year-olds for the most part are healthy. So if they are getting it, where they have to fill out a waiver that says whether or not they've been exposed within the last couple of days, and then whether they've had it or not, had a test. And so they've, for the most part, the people who are coming in have either had it and been post quarantine, and then they're just recovering without much complications, or we're just not seeing them. And we're not naive in the sense that it could be potentially around, but yeah, most of our clients are really just healthy. I just had I think a 15-year-old kid today who said, I hadn't seen him in a couple of weeks, and he said, sure enough, that he had it.
Mm,
He just felt a little gassed. Obviously, we're seeing a lot more of this kind of like post-COVID return to sport guideline that's been coming out, and so we're just following that a little bit closer. It's interesting. It's an interesting thought to think of how it's affecting people who may not be having such large functional impairments like Allie's patients, but still coming down with around some form of issue.
yeah, I
Mhm.
think the post COVID stuff is going to be interesting. Like, um, I've read some stories about some kids not being able to be basically not having a senior year, so that they're not getting drafted or not being like scouted by any like athletes and stuff like that. And I have one kid; he's younger, and he had a patellar relocation, and basically basically same protocol as ACL. And he's had all this time off, and like thankfully, I'm there to help him get back to like fitness and working out and getting back into a normal program. But I'm wondering what it's going to be like post COVID with some of these athletes, and like maybe coaches bringing them back into some aggressive like conditioning stuff too soon.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, think about it from like an outpatient standpoint, especially if you're getting people who are coming in for a specific referral, a specific body region. If you're still stuck with the standard 30 minutes, even 60-minute visits with them, how much of that do you want them to be just cardiovascular conditioning, and how much do you want them to actually be working on the potential issue at hand? Obviously, the longer time you have, the more you're willing to adjust that accordingly. But the current the outpatient clinic I'm at, you're seeing people for 30 minutes, and you really don't want them working with an aide and staying longer than they have to, just because then numbers start increasing. So
Right.
if you have 4 or 5 therapists working and it's still a relatively big gym, we've got to kind of cut it off to be like, hey, you can do a lot of this at home. You should go do that. But
Mhm.
yeah, it makes a good point of how much cardiovascular conditioning we should actually be doing.
Yeah, and how many patients are you seeing like a day typically, or like within an hour?
So my part time, I'm seeing one every 30 minutes. So 20 hours, I'm seeing someone about 7 a day, and
Okay.
then yeah, and then on the training side, it's a membership model, so they can come whenever they want. But we're probably looking at them a little bit more looser than a client or a patient right in front of you.